Esternwood. Warding symbols as red and rough as cubs have been carved into some of the trees. East to Rydrick's Hold, west to Gilded Vale.
Indeed.
Hello, Bumby. Hello, mother of Bumby. Dead adventurer. These carvings glisten with fresh sap.
Hey. Of course.
Another Becker messages. Not interested. Graveyard. Rydrick's Hold. Oh, I forgot about this quest. Okay, wait a second.
Hail, traveler.
Nasu is assigned, alright?
How may I help?
What? Following your lead.
Ready, Watcher.
Hey. I shall.
So according to that Kolsch guy, or Kolsk, whatever, the sewer entrance is to the east.
Wouldn't mind having a word with our esteemed lord while we're here. Got some suggestions for him.
Are you sure you want to speak to the Lord Eder? Kledlan, the guard fixes a glower on you. You have no business here. Lord Rydrick is not permitting any visitors, merchants or traveling entertainers. He sneers. Best turn right around. Arismetal says, I'm here to see Rydrick. Step aside. The guard snorts. Are you hard of hearing? He draws his sword. You've got one more chance to turn around. The guards inside won't be half so gentle. Arismetal says, let's try this again. Step aside or die choking on your own innards. The sellsword's grim expression wavers for a moment. He looks to his comrade, signaling with a nod, and raises his weapon. Far as I can see, you've misjudged your odds, friend. Bad luck for you. So it's fail then? The resolve option failed? Okay. Nudwin, Cletlan. A heavy stench rises from the stagnant waters. This is it. Set into the base of the keep's outer wall, a sewer grate spills murky, foul-smelling wastewater into the keep's surrounding moat. Slick, mossy stones form a precarious bridge across the murky water. Ahead, the iron bars of the sewer grate block passage. The bars are coated with rust, and several appear bent or sit at strange angles. They may have been weakened enough that you could bend them given the means. Bend the bars. You think that someone of sufficient strength could bend some of the more worn bars, allowing passage. Who will make the attempt? You. You step forward to grip one of the iron bars. Leaning back, you pull as hard as you can. The metal bends steadily under the strain until with a snap, it breaks free of its moorings. Another moment's work sees a second bar bent enough to clear a passage through the grate. Swim through. You take a deep breath to forestall the acrid stench around you, and slip forward into the flooded tunnel. The walls soon fade from view as you plunge into a foreboding darkness. As you swim on, light begins to filter through the murky water ahead of you. You press on, seeking out the source until you find yourself standing beneath a circular gap in the tunnel and a way out. Rydrick's Hold Dungeons. I want to explore the outer field first. I haven't done that. To Dungeon Sewer. The security of this castle is very lacking. Two guards at the front died from fighting assaulters, and the castle has not yet sent reinforcements to guard the area. I mean this area, where the two guards were killed in the fight with Arismetal and his companions. No one saw what happened. What kind of security system do they have here? Not realizing that two guards were killed in a fight. The castle's bell tower rises up over the walls before you. Thick vines have grown over the outer wall, weaving over and between the stones. The vines span nearly the full height of the wall, curling over the parapets. Examine the wall. The overgrown vines look fairly sturdy, though it is unclear whether they would bear a person's weight. Far above, you notice that a section of the parapets has fallen away, presenting a gap in the defenses. Jump to reach the vines. You get a running start on the bank of the moat and leap, aiming for some of the thicker vines. Your handhold sways and there is an ominous cracking sound above, but the vines hold. The tower looms above you. Climb up the vines. You make your way steadily up the face of the wall. After a long and wearying climb, the top of the wall finally comes within reach, and you are able to pull yourself up and over. Rydrig's Hold. This seems like a nicer point of entry. This isn't the sewer. To Temple Armory. To Courtyard. to temple storage. Priest of Berath, Paladin of Berath. Let's go back to the sewers. These rickety planks sit precariously over the side of the wall, looking out over the precipitous drop below. Beneath the scaffolding, vines grow in thick clumps over the weathered stones. Climb back down. After a few tense moments where you are left dangling precariously over the side of the wall, you manage to get a handhold and slowly work your way back down to the ground. Look at the black dog, or hound, so cute, following us around. But the dog was able to hold its breath, entering from the sewers. That's such a... How long dogs can hold their breath underwater, actually? Yeah.
Yes?
Hey,
Following your lead.
Vessel bone, once one of the bones to which a soul desperately clung. Now it holds only traces of the life it held.
Of course.
I can do that. As requested.
House Doemenel. What can be said about House Doemenel that isn't whispered fearfully in a back room over the dim light of a dying fire, in fear that the wrong set of ears will hear it? The Doemenel history is colorful and violent, exciting and more than a little bloody. The Doemenels were a small Idirian family that dealt almost exclusively in textiles. They made a modest living, slowly gaining a reputation for having high-quality products. This reputation earned them connections, business, social, and sometimes marital, that solidified their position as the premier family of the region. If you wanted access to anyone, the Dominals were the way to do it. Soon, every city had a business that was owned at least in part by the Dominals. Their power and influence grew until many said the family had more power than even the very conning of Idir. But with the power came the corruption. One cannot have that level of control and expect to keep it through strictly legal means. Soon, rumors were spreading of threats and extortion, though it cannot be proven. The unofficial report is that the Doemenels were responsible for the death of Trindik Björnwiger, which left his entire shipping empire in the hands of his wife, Udele Doemenel Björnwiger. Interesting. With their hold on the land practically secured, the Dominals no longer stuck to the shadows, brazenly eliminating opponents, manipulating deals, and threatening anyone who might cause them a problem. Because they now dominated the trade route, no one dared oppose them anymore for fear their business would be strangled. Like most empires, though, not even theirs could last forever. The end came during the War of Defiance. Unlike most of the land, the Doemenels threw in with Idir instead of Admeth Hadret. After the defeat of the empire and the destruction wrought on the land during the war, not even the Doemenels could rebuild what they had. And having history show them on the wrong side of the war, no one would touch the name. The domain that took years to build crumbled in mere months. Today, the Doemenels have once again built a name for themselves, proving they are still capable and savvy business people. Rumors about the family still circulate, though. Word is members of the family are striving to lift the family from its current obscurity and elevate it to the level of power it once held.
Would you look at that?
Okay. A trap grazes a dare for 35 pierce damage. Dang it. Barracks construction completed. What should I make next? South Curtain Wall. The South Curtain Wall provides further protection to the Bailey from invaders coming from the south. The dungeons of Kait Nua contain 9 cells. Upgrading the dungeons will allow you to take prisoners during your travels. Really? Merchant stalls. Purchasing the merchant stalls will allow for a merchant to sell general goods in your great hall. Purchase. A trap noxious burst grazes Kana for 84 corrode damage. What the heck?
Going as I hoped.
Gouge marks and scratches line the edge of the lid. The edge of the lid. The coffins. That sounds bad. The bite marks on these bones appear to be the proper size for folk and elven teeth. Interesting. Bite marks on the bones. What's going on here? Have something to do with the creatures we just fought. Unlocking this will require the proper key. I see cannot be lockpicked. Okay.
Would you look at that?
to lower ramparts.
I have.
Laying low.
I'll give it a try, at least, as requested.
A few bloodied fingernails are embedded in the dirt. Gyako?
I'll give it a try, at least.
Hey, over here, says Gyako. Get me out of this cell, please. Gyako. This young man's face is badly bruised, and his gaunt form is covered in a threadbare shirt. He watches you shivering with a measure of hope in his eyes. I don't know who you are, but will you help me? Adair looks pained. Our noble lord at work. Gyako gazes nervously past you at the open cell door. I don't think I can fight my way out. Aris Mittal says, I take it you ended up here after assaulting the keep with Kolsch and his men. Yes, Gyako looks away. It seemed a good plan. We got in without incidents and I knew the way, but we were surprised in the dungeons and most of us. Gyako shudders. You'll have seen some of them, fought them, their bodies, at least not their minds anymore, but their souls. Gyako referring to the creatures? Gyako says, the woman down here, Raedric's animancer, her name is Oshria. I've heard her speaking sometimes, talking about a cure. Lord Raedric calls on her often, but she's not curing anyone. She's only turned men and women into monsters. Yako shudders. I watch her take the others. I was sure I'd be next. So, this Oshria turned men and women into monsters. This Oshria must be the O. Must be the O individual. Mentioned in the letter to Ludrana, ordering Ludrana to capture Kolsh men as specimens. Continue. Aloth shakes his head. Men and women turn to this evil to cure Hollowborn, madness. Arismetal says, tell me about Oshria. Yako says, there's something not right about her, a bad feeling I mean. I knew the moment she arrived things would take a turn for the worse. Yako shivers. There's nothing good comes of dealing with animancers, unnatural the lot of them. She's the one who transformed them, changed my friends into monsters. Said she was doing it for the good of Gilded Vale. Yako clenches a fist, more like the good of her coin purse and her sick curiosity. She's dangerous, and who knows what else she's got in her laboratory. I wouldn't go in there. She has a convincing manner, spells no doubt. Arismetal says, you're free, make a run for it. Yaku says, thank you stranger, I have to get back to the fork, but first some food and rest, I think. Yaku hesitates. If you would dare the upper floors, please tell Nedmar I live yet. Tell him I still have the carving he gave me, of the pale knight. That should convince him, and perhaps he can help you somehow. So Nedmar, Kolsh mentioned someone by the name of Nedmar. Continue. Yaku says, good luck, and may the gods keep you safe. I see. Blood is smeared on the wall in the vague shape of letters. Whatever it once said has been obscured by a crimson handprint.
That's not nice. All done.
Let's see what we found.
Dang it, Arismetal. Zero endurance.
Keeping an eye out.
To keep kitchen.
I'll have this open in no time. It's done.
Blood and flecks of dried flesh encrust the restraints. The tank is warm to the touch. The glass vibrates with the bubbling fluid inside. Oh, Oshra, a woman, caught mid-step across the room, turns her head to face you. Long curls of black hair frame her face, one side of which is flecked with some green liquid. The gaze she sets upon you holds an eerie intensity. More interruptions. The woman sets down the book she holds, smiling faintly. What an interesting time we've been having of late. So many uninvited guests. I suppose I have to thank you for all the damage to my work. It took time to get those people back on their feet, you know? Oshra frowns. What is it you're doing here? Aris Mittal says, Lord Rydrick sent me to check on your progress. Oshria regards you coldly for a long moment. At last she throws her arms up in the air in frustration. Of course he did. I thought I'd have a few days at least before he resumed his growling. If Lord Rydrick wishes to see swifter progress, then perhaps he might deign to provide the materials I need. Does he think he is the only one growing impatient? I am gifted with this. Oshria gestures to the room. Pitiful little laboratory, and he expects miracles. And meanwhile that old wretch, that useless priest, has the whole of the upper keep to himself. What does he provide? Superstition and useless advice. Oshria lets out an angry gust of air. Very well then, look upon my progress. I've made what use of Kol's filthy cohorts I was able. I see. Kol's cohorts were turned into these creatures. Continue. Oshria says, tell Rydrick that I will have more useful information for him once I have been given adequate time for study. Oshria snorts. If you're lucky, he won't hang you in my place. The Deerwood Part 4 Hadred's Rebellion. The rural communities loved Admeth Hadred, considering him the best leader they'd ever had. In Aidir, the Verkoning rankled against his usurpations of imperial authority, but no longer had the necessary power to truly undo anything that had happened. 2 years later, in 2664 AI, the Verkoning found allies willing to explore the ruins against the treaty conditions, and plundered them for their artifacts. This was done discreetly at first, but they eventually became careless. The agents were discovered and arrested, but there was no evidence pointing back to the Verkoning. Admeth, suspecting the truth, used Glanfathan Grishalgwyn, mine hunters, the progenitors of modern-day ciphers, to investigate the matter further. With this method of interrogation, he discovered a chain of evidence all the way back to the Verkoning. While he investigated, many rural communities suffered retaliatory attacks by Glanfathans. Armed with this new information, Admeth worked with Galven Medra, the new leader of the Glanfathans, and the rural communities of the Deerwood to prevent the Verkoning's agents from entering the ruins. There was a back and forth between the two groups, both sides engaging in various political, economic, and military maneuvers to try and gain the upper hand. The Verkoning was at a disadvantage in this game though, as he preferred to assert his authority without causing an uprising. Eventually Admeth had enough. He convinced 7 of the 9 earls to join him, and they severed their allegiance to the Verkoning, declaring themselves independent and decree they would govern themselves, just as the Violin republics did 20 years prior. Admeth told the people he had tired of policies that made the nobles rich while putting the people of the Deerwood at risk. He declared himself a duke, again modeled after the Violin Republic's governing structure, and called the Deerwood a free palatinate. Thus began the War of the Defiance in 2668 AI. The war lasted 4 years and caused countless casualties, including Admeth himself. The Deerwoodens, with their Glanfathan allies, were able to persevere. Glanfathan astrologers alongside the Deerwooden forces and members of the ad hoc knights of the Crucible Militia won the Battle of Defiance Bay, which became the last battle of the war and left Deerwood free from Idiran imperial rule. 7 of the 9 earls of the Deerwood survived and, unified in purpose, signed treaties with the Ferkoning of Idir. The war gave the Deerwood a greater sense of unity between its citizens and their Glanfathan allies. Admeth Hadred was revered by both groups, and the Deerwood enjoyed for the first time a nationwide fellowship of independence, perseverance, and sacrifice. Yenwood and Swinsrun were dissolved and incorporated into the surrounding earldoms, leaving 7 Hell's Gate, the Grasp, Tenferths, Norwijk, Coldwater, Ashfall, and Bile Reach. New Dunrear was renamed Defiance Bay and would become the seat of power for the new Duke in Bile Reach. The new Duke's rule began in 2672 AI. So, Durance mentioned Ashfall. I think he said he came from Ashfall or something like that. The Deerwood Part 6, The Saints' War and White One's Legacy. In 2807 AI, war returned to the Deerwood. Saint Whitewind, transformed supposedly into a living incarnation of Eothas, marched on the Deerwood from Reat Seras, beginning the Saints' War. The Deerwood rallied at Halgod Citadel, took the battle to him in Reat Seras, attempting to prevent as much damage to their own land as they could, even though there were devastating loss for the Deerwooden forces. Using Hadred's military techniques combined with Galven Ragged's strategies. Galven Ragged? I read the previous volumes. Wasn't Ragged the Orlan leader of the Glanfathan Orlan leader? So he survived? Or is it another Ragged? With Galven Ragged's strategies, they were able to secure a few victories for themselves as well. Reatseran force made their way into the Deerwood through White March, unopposed by the locals at Cold Morn, leaving Mercy Vale burned and devastated. The contempt the Deerwoodens have for Cold Morn, for this betrayal, lasts well after the war ends. Okay, so I was wrong. Deerwooden forces using Hadred's military techniques, combined with Galven Ragged's strategies. It's not necessarily Galven Ragged himself, but only his strategies were being used. Okay, let's continue. Desperate to end the war and eliminate Saint Whitewen, the Magranic clergy of Deerwood developed a special bomb that was hidden beneath the bridge at Halgod Citadel, intending to lure Whitewen into the bridge and then detonate it. Their ploy succeeded and Saint Whitewen was completely destroyed, along with most of the forces with him and the entire bridge. The 12 Deerwooden men and women who volunteered to delay Saint Whitewen on the bridge were also lost, their sacrifice and martyrdom celebrated by the Deerwood in the ensuing years. The bomb would come to be known as the God Hammer, and soon after the battle, the citadel was renamed Godhammer Citadel. Saint Whiteone's forces were easily routed after his death, and the Deerwood set about rebuilding from the first major conflict in over a century. In retaliation for Saint Whiteone's action on Eothas's part, many Eothasian followers were purged from their wooden communities or driven out via social pressure. Less than a year after the devastation of the Saints' War, tragedy hit again. In 2809 AI, the first Hollowborn was reported in the Deerwood. Many of these poor creatures died within weeks or months of being born. The outcry from the populace calls for blame or punishment be leveled against someone, whether it be gods, the mothers, the government, or the Eothasian followers. Responding to great socio-political pressure to try and help the Hollowborn, Animancers developed a process to transplant animal souls into the infants, that they might develop survival instincts and even basic personality. The process seemed successful, so it was repeated on tens of thousands of Hollowborn, even though many Animancers disagreed with the technique, worried about the ethical implications. These protests were largely ignored and discounted. The process was soon named Salvation, and the Hollowborn given souls this way were called the Saved. 5 years after the first Hollowborn, an Orlan girl is saved. She entered puberty. In a matter of mere weeks, she transformed into a ravenous feral creature, devoid of all conscience. Soon, all of the saved would experience the same fate. Each one, upon reaching puberty, would transform into what the locals called wicked, uncontrollable children. After researching the problem, Animancers discovered an incompatibility between the animal souls and the children's bodies. This fueled the parents' anger, as many of them had to kill their weak children. The Animancers responsible were widely denounced, and many of them were dragged from their homes, beaten, and in many cases killed. Most surviving Animancers left the rural areas en masse and headed to Defiance Bay. Others left the area completely, moving to the violent republics to study in peace. Wait a minute. It is said here that Animancers disagreed with the technique. So I'm guessing the ones who disagree also got beaten and killed. That's tragic. Black Cat. At first you think this poor creature is deceased, for its black fur seems to have fallen off its hide in patches, but when the cat turns to investigate a fly on the wall, you note that an entire section of its ribcage is open to the air. Some of its tail has rotted away altogether to reveal a few jagged vertebrae. Ew, disgusting. This doesn't seem to bother the cat much. It lets out a thrilling purr and rubs against your shin. Pet the cat. You spend a few pleasant moments scratching the cat between the ears. Black fur comes away in clumps. Pick up the cat. You pick up the surprisingly light and unexpectedly pointy creature, and it purrs contentedly in your arms. What is this, zombie cat? Or should I say, do move along. Roderick's a demanding fellow, and I have much to do. Okay, whatever you say. Let's go to lower ramparts.
Yes? I shall.
The canisters are filled with wet, clumped gunpowder. The bottom staves of the barrels are dark but dry. Whatever these barrels held leaked out long ago. It's a dead end here. Roderick's Keep. Roderick's Hold Sanctuary. The rose goat smells only faintly of smoke and burnt fat. Hunks of meat have been carved from the cold carcass.
Lava.
Indeed.
Under the pillow is a wooden medallion carved with a rising sun and 3 stars. It's tied to a leather thong. So, rising sun and 3 stars, isn't it the symbol of Eothas? So someone has been secretly worshipping Eothas in Roderick's Hold.
Lava.
Silver forks and knives are gnawed with tarnish.
Ugh!
The joints are fringed with rust. The emblem on the breastplate is of a tree with broad, heart-shaped leaves. Ah.
Lavaru, be up.
Rainwater twitching with tiny larvae sloshes in the barrel. The air in the stable is heavy with bat dung. Bat dung? To lower ramparts.
That's not nice. All done.
I can do that. That's settled.
Addendum added? What? I don't know.
Lava. Lava. Lava.
Scroll note. I got your gift. I cannot believe someone actually wrote down that kind of thing on parchment. I left something for you in the chapel. Careful not to go digging in the wrong skull again. The Deerwood Part 5. The Proliferation of Animancy. Animancy, outlawed while under Aedir rule, was technically no longer taboo. After Hadred's rebellion, academics began its study again in earnest in 2681 AI. By 2697 AI, there were almost 40 academics actively researching the field, both in the Deerwood and the Vailian republics, even though no significant results had been discovered. A tragic breakthrough of sorts happened in 2704 AI. An animancer working in Bile Reach accidentally shattered the souls of about a dozen volunteers who had been helping him. In retaliation for the deaths, the citizens of the area stormed his house and killed him. The Earl of the region, not wanting to waste resources or anger the locals any more than they already were, did nothing to find the head of the vigilante mob, but neither did he outlaw animancy. To ensure their own safety, most animancers moved from the rural areas where they were studying and settled in Defiance Bay, many of them choosing the emerging and wealthy district of Brackenbury as their new home of operations. While there were still a few breakthroughs, and the study of animancy continued for the next 24 years. It quickly slowed as it became cost prohibitive and complicated the more people learn about it. Most animancers couldn't afford to continue research without the support of donations or gifts from wealthy individuals and organizations. In 2737 AI, some animancers, desperate to continue their studies and seeing no other means of furthering their research, entered the forbidden ruins of Glanfath to further their research. They discovered some such sites had strange artifacts that seemed to bear affinity to soul essence, and began to prod at the devices for further insight. Even with continued research, they are unable to tell quite what they have discovered. Eventually they were found out by the Glanfathans, who captured some of them, demanding they be punished for their crimes. The Deerwooden authorities, in order to maintain their treaties and keep the peace, had no choice. They allowed the animancers to be executed according to Glanfathan tradition. This led the Duke to make an additional proclamation. The study and practice of animancy on or even near the sacred Glanfathan sites would be punishable by death. In 2780 AI, in order to solidify relations with the Glanfathans, the Deerwooden government allowed some animancers began training and experiments in conjunction with the Glanfathan mine hunters, their native ciphers. This was an exchange of information. The animancers documented the secrets of the mine hunters' powers. The mine hunters learned new techniques for concentration, which assisted them in taking their powers to a level no Glanfathan had seen before. The ciphers, no longer wary of the animancers' intentions, trusted them to such a level that they convinced the Glanfathans to give some animancers limited access to some of the training sites where the Glanfathans practiced. The Anamfaths of the Glanfathan tribes opened the training grounds to the animancers. They were not allowed inside, as this was still strictly forbidden, but the general allowances by the Glanfathans were seen as a breakthrough in relations between the Deerwood and Glanfath. Over the next 8 years, the animancers' research would continue unimpeded. With the exception of some minor squabbles, there has been no major strife between the two groups for almost 120 years since. The many faces of Berath. How fitting that we know the god of cycles, doorways and mortality, and inevitability as Berath. Okay, wait a second. The many faces of Berath. How fitting that we know the god of cycles, doorways and mortality, and inevitability as Berath, while the Violians know this very same god as Sirono. For if nothing else, Berath teaches us that duality exists in all things. There is life in death and death in life. Embrace this duality and you honor Berath. In the ruins Glanfath, Berath is depicted in the form of two semi-skeletal figures, one male, one female, Beunen I Ankeo and Ankeo I Beunen, literally life in death and death in life, in the Glanfathan tongue. Male and female inside and outside, life and death. We often think of Berath by imagining two sides of coin or the two endpoints of a journey. It's said that Berath has the most petitioners of every god, and this is likely true. Who amongst us has not prayed for the cycle to hiccup? Who has not, in a moment of sadness, yelled at Berath to make an exception for our fallen loved ones? Wrath may not rescue our loved ones, but it answers our prayers in its own divine way. Wrath is the god that makes life end in death, and it also the god that makes death end in life. Wrath Sirono Beunen I Ankeo I Beunen, whichever of the many names you prefer to use, deserves our prayers, for it has given us the promise of life's eternal renewal.
A simple test. I can do that. I can do that.
Join arms!
You might find
Sweet
this
musky
interesting.
incense is stored in boxes under the altar. To dungeon crypts. To temple chantry.
A simple test. That's settled.
Netmar. This frail old priest is hunched over a table, surrounded by scattered scrolls and parchments, examining their contents with the aid of a thick monocle. He glances up as you approach, blinking rheumy eyes. More visitors then? You're not one of the acolytes or the guards for that matter. Nedmar's voice is a dry, quiet rasp. Which makes you an intruder at the least. Kolsch put you up to this, I suppose? Yes, that would be him, sending young men to dash themselves against the keep's defenses. Nedmar shakes his head. Would that my sermons could draw such fervor. Still, you are here, what is it you want? Arismital says, Gyako is safe. He asked me to tell you about a carving you gave him. Nedmar's eyes widen. With sudden vigor, he rushes forward to grasp your arms. Oh, thank the gods, thank you. I did not think anyone could. That is, I feared. Nedmar shakes his head. I did not want him to meet the pale knight so soon. Nedmar pulls away, collecting himself. Here, perhaps this will serve as a reward. He pulls a large iron key from the pocket of his robe and hands it to you. This will open a door in the scriptorium. Nedmar points west, and from there you can reach the chapel and Lord Rydrick without encountering quite so many guards. Take this too. I have little wealth to offer, better to give something of use. I would entreat you before you go. Despite his shortcomings, Lord Rydrick follows the gods with obedience, and he has Gilded Vale's best interest in mind. It may be that with time, he can achieve what he desires. Please, consider this before you turn to violence. Arismital says, I thought you'd favor Kolsch as Lord of Rydrick's hold. Nedmar says, I favor him as he is, a man of vision, but Kolsk has a hunger in him for rule, even if to good purpose. He is not led by his faith. Still, he is my friend, and I am willing to assist Kolsch in restoring divine favor to the lands of Gilded Vale, should Lord Rydrick fall, that is. Arismital asks, what does this key open? Nedmar says, it is a master key. Nedmar wrings his hands as he speaks. It will not open every door, but it will permit you access to the stairs leading down into the Lord's chapel. It will also open the doors along the keep's main hall, but you will face heavy fighting if you go that way. You do not have much time. Whatever your intent, Lord Rydrick will soon discover that one of his prisoners has escaped, and then you will lose the element of surprise. Arismital says, I need to rest. Nedmar says, but surely you don't mean to. Nedmar shifts uncomfortably, looking out towards the hallway. Very well. I cannot ask you to brave the dungeons when you are not at your fittest. Rest here a few hours, and I will ensure no one enters. Admeth Hadred Part 2 Rebellion. Over the 5 years following his ascension to Gref, Admeth attempted to mend relations with the Glanfathans and bring his land together with theirs. He enacted laws that restricted the taking of new slaves, allowed Glanfathans to buy their fellows out of bondage, and impose a tax on slave ownership in order to promote the use of free labor. While there was some resistance to these new laws, the Fair Koning's attention to Reelseras and Admeth's power, backed by the colonists, made it difficult for the Earls to truly resist what was happening. In 2662 AI, in the year of the 10th anniversary of the War of Black Trees, Admeth brought about the end to slavery in the Deerwood. He negotiated a series of treaties with the Glenfathans, wherein a timeline was established for the official emancipation of all remaining slaves. Each owner would receive compensation in either land or money based on the number of slaves freed. If they didn't comply, the slaves would be seized and their former masters would suffer a substantial fine. In return for this, the Glenfathans opened the trade routes with the Deerwood and allowed Deerwoodans to live in and near areas that had their sacred ruins, but they are under no conditions to enter the ruins. As a final act of goodwill, Admeth freed Galvin Ragged, saying he had suffered sufficiently for his actions. The fair Conning, seeing he was completely out of control in his own palatinate, devised a plan to get the supply of ancient artifacts running again. He approached the Earls suffering under Admeth's rule and convinced them to hire agents to raid the ruins. Initially they did so in secret, but they quickly became sloppy, eventually being caught. This breach of the treaties incited Glenfathans again to acts of violence, while Admeth researched who was behind it. With the help of the Glenfathan leaders, Admeth found evidence that pointed back to the Fair Conning as the source of the raids. That was the beginning of the end for Idiran rule in the Deerwood. Over the next 7 years, Admeth and the Fair Conning maneuvered around each other, playing political, economic, and military games in order to gain the upper hand. In 2668 AI, Admeth declared the Deerwood had had enough. The Fair Conning would no longer be recognized. The Deerwood was now a free entity and would govern itself. This started the War of Defiance, which lasted 5 years. The end result of the war was freedom for the Deerwood, and though Duke Hadred would never live to see it come to a close, the people of Deerwood consider him the founder of the country nevertheless. Berathian Scripture. Behold, thou faithful, the visage of thy transformation. Fear not the journey when the portal opens. Become one with the will, with glad heart and cheerful countenance, for the doorway shall open for all in their time. Neither the rich nor influential, neither kings nor rulers, neither the strong nor powerful can escape its embrace. Berath will usher thee through the doorway, and thou willst return to life, thy immortal life begun anew. There goes a cycle, there goest life, there thou goest also. Thou shalt approach the door, the inevitable shall approach thee. Do not turn back on the portal, do not turn back on new life. Walk the path and welcome change, or face the night. For he walks the road with thee and will guide all to their destination. Thou mortal, the skull thou wilt become. Thou closed off, the key thou shalt turn. Thou sealed, the threshold thou shalt cross. To Keep Chapel.
Seek!
Onward!
Seek!
Charge!
How may I help?
I can do that. As requested.
The threadbare robes in the closet smell of incense.
Of course.
To siege platform. Psalm to Voidica. Ye exiles, ye broken, fear not the vengeance of the burdened queen. She watches from her throne, ever vigilant. She hears the oath thou dost speak at her altar. She hears the oath thou dost speak in thine home. She hears the oath thou dost speak in the dark. For ye who would keep thy word, thou shalt escape the justice of her gaze. Beware, ye liars, ye unfaithful. Beware ye with a hardened heart. Beware, for the eye of Voidica will not be blinded. She hears the sundered oath. She is not fooled by the winding path. She attends the broken promise. She sees the deceiver. There is no shadow too dark. Her gaze will find thee. Her justice will not be restrained. The fires of justice will never be quenched. The throne will crack. The law will burn, but the queen that was always will be. Speak not an untruth, or thy tongue will be bound. Remember thy place, remember thine oath, remember thy queen. Naasitak Poetry, a compilation. Expedition. I move. There is no compulsion. It is not a need, but something pulls. I cannot deny its draw. The white wends out past my vision. His fierce eyes watch me as I move. The wolf tracks my step, a silent companion who will not join. All is blank. The pale expanse lies before and behind. I search. The miles pass and still my feet move. My hand continues unabated. The landscape returns my gaze, unaffected by my presence. The snow falls needless, needles driven by the wind. Its cold teeth bite my skin. The snow gathers, its hands around my feet, a fierce opponent who will not relent. All is white, my journey continues. I travel, I can no longer stop. A true compulsion forms, the need drives me on. I must see. The sun breaks through the grey, its unrelenting gaze thaws me. My body warms under its touch. Rigid limbs move again and carry me farther. All is empty, the breath of existence is my destination. Used burnished steel key.
What's this?
Oh. Saying why the one farmer become god? Okay, wait a second. Saint White One, farmer become god. With the mention of the name White One, most folk think only one word, Godhammer. While this event echoes through the ages and is still felt years after the destruction of Evan Dower Bridge, White One's humble beginnings belie the powerful force he would grow into. White One lived an unassuming life in a remote area of Reatseras, the son of a Vorlas farmers. He toiled the field alongside his father for 22 years until his father's death. The farm then fell to him to run. He considered selling, but had no other skills upon which to draw, so he set on the path of Vorlas farmer as well. Nothing of note has been recorded in Whitewind's life until 4 years after his father's death. One day, while working the fields, Whitewind's life was irrevocably changed. In his words, night was falling, the fingers of dusk already gripping the sky. The sun had dipped behind the world's edge, and stars were peeking from beyond the shroud. The day was still, and darkness had blanketed the field. I placed my last harvest of the day into the collection pile, when from behind me arose a brilliant light. I turned, fear in my breast, knowing not what could have caused such an intense radiance. Behind me stood a blazing figure, resplendent in glory. In its white flesh glowed with a luminescent radiance, its head a blinding ball of light, brighter than the high sun of mid-year. I averted my gaze, afraid I would be struck down for daring to gaze upon such a creature. A sudden peace washed over me, sweeping away my fear, leaving my troubled soul tranquil. A loving warmth wrapped its arms around me. A voice spoke to me as I stood transfixed, trying to both see this glorious being and avoid its dazzling scrutiny. "Fear not," it said to me, "for you are chosen above all others. You will be the light to bring about the rebirth of an empire." It then held out its hand and bestowed me a vision of power such that I could scarcely contain it. Wide Wen, dishevelled and dirty, stumbled into his village the next morning, telling all who would listen about the miracle that happened in his fields. Eothas himself, he claimed, had appeared to him. He was to punish the Idaean governor for leading his people into ruin. A way would be provided, and those faithful who helped would be blessed when the divinity manifested. Villagers ignored him, convinced the loss of his parents had broken his mind. But Whitewood continued to preach of the power of Eothas and the corruption of the governor, eventually earning him the ire of the locals. His confrontations with the villagers hit a turning point one day in mid-autumn. A crowd had gathered around Whitewood, jeering him and telling him to leave the village. The Borlas crop that season was particularly light, and the villagers blamed Whitewood, saying he had angered the gods, particularly Eothas. With his blasphemy, they backed him into one of the withered fields, yelling at him to go. Accounts of the inciting action are hazy. Some say a stone was thrown, others say he was pushed, others still say he simply tripped over a dry root sticking from the ground. Regardless of the cause, Whitewood landed face down on the ground, the villagers standing over him laughing. Enough, a voice, not Whitewood's, boomed across the field. Whitewood looked up at the crowd, his eyes glowing with a blinding white light. He stood but did not stand. One moment he was on the ground, and the next he was standing before the crowd, who cowered before him. "You dare deny me?" The voice spoke through Whitewood's mouth. "You dare to refuse my servant?" Whitewood's arms raised, beginning to luminous. "You dare to require proof?" His arms went out to his sides. "Never ask again, lest you be burned in the light of the new dawn." There was a flash of light from Whitewood's eyes, and hands and the entire field sprang to life. The once dried and brittle plants became full, lush, and verdant. The crowd was silent. From somewhere in the back came a call of "Praise Eothas," and then they all fell to their knees in front of Whitewood, farmer turned god. The Deerwood Part 4 Hadred's Rebellion. The rural communities laughed at Meth Hadred, considering him the best. I think I've read this one, right? Yes, I've read this one. The joints are fringed with rust. The emblem on the breastplate is of a tree with broad heart-shaped leaves.
I'm on the trail.
The Ideal Empire Part 2 Expanding Borders. In 2602 AI, Idean explorers return from over the ocean, telling tales of the ruins and treasures there, and of expansive fields that were perfect for growing Vorlas. The explorers warned the Verkoning that the locals were not friendly to outsiders, but the Verkoning, seeing this as an opportunity to extend his empire and secure trade on another continent, sent more explorers. Over the next 20 years, the area that would become the Deerwood was investigated, mapped, and colonized. In 2623, the first permanent Idean colonial settlements were established. Vorlas fields were set up north. Vorlas fields were set up north of the forest in the Deerwood, but between the conflicts with the Glanfathans and the War of the Broken Stone, it floundered. It wasn't until 2643 that the opportunity presented itself again. Some Eothasian pilgrims, wanting to escape persecution, established colonies and Vorlas farming operations in the territory of Reatseras. With Grenvailia on the verge of collapse, the Verkoning wanted to ensure his hold on the purple dye trade would be established. He encouraged the settlement and even paid to have the pilgrims set up in the New World. Because the Verkoning was still trying to secure his name in the purple dye trade, he was unable to properly respond to Atmeth Hadret when he issued his ultimatum to avoid a rebellion and leave himself time to oversee the Vorlas farms in Reatseras. The Verkoning relented and made Atmeth a Gref Palatine. In return for this concession, Atmeth spent time and resources on the Deerwood's trade and shipping routes, benefiting the Verkoning with increased income. For 7 years, the Deerwood provided Idear with a steady income, leaving the Verkoning time to ensure his trade system in Reatseras was strong. With the Verkoning's attention elsewhere, Atmeth instituted the 10 Years Treaties, ending slavery in the Deerwood and permanently removing one of the revenue sources provided by the Deerwooden explorers. The artifacts from the ruins scattered throughout the Deerwood. At this point, the Verkoning's word meant almost nothing to the citizens of the Deerwood. Atmeth Hadret had replaced him as their true leader. In order to undermine Atmeth's standing, the Verkoning found allies willing to explore the ruins against the treaty conditions and plunder them. Soon Idear again had a supply of artifacts to sell. When his agents were eventually caught, the Verkoning distanced himself from the operation, certain there was no way to link him to the proceedings. But the Gref, using means provided to him by his Glanfathan allies, discovered the evidence needed to prove the Verkoning was behind the plunderers. The conflict that arose from this revelation led to Atmeth declaring independence for the Deerwood in 2688 AI. 2668 AI, after a bloody 4-year-long war that resulted in the death of Atmeth. The Verkoning relented, Trying to keep control of the Deerwood had become too costly. He signed treaties with the new Duke of the Deerwood and returned his attention to Reaceras, redoubling efforts on the Volas trade, which is still running today. This must happen before the Saints' War, because the Idaran Empire still has hold over the Reaceras, and according to the book about the Saints' War, Whitewen rose up against the governor, the Idaran governor. Interesting.
A simple test. That's settled.
Dusty old ledgers record the taxes paid on farmsteads in Gilded Vale as far back as 2632.